At family dinner, my niece snatched my necklace and said, "Mom says it's from the flea market." Then, my name is Mia Caldwell. I'm 40 years old. I live in Seattle, and I've always believed in quiet things, the steady logic of numbers, the comfort of a rainy afternoon, the unspoken love held in an old piece of jewelry. For most of my life, I let my quietness be mistaken for weakness. That was my mistake, and this is the story of how I corrected it. The laughter around the dinner table didn't just stop, it shattered. It froze midair, caught in the sharp metallic snap that echoed in the sudden silence. My grandmother's necklace, a delicate white gold chain holding 3 small, impossibly bright diamonds, was no longer around my neck. It was dangling from the fist of my 12-year-old niece, Lily. She held it up to the light of the dining room chandelier, twirling it between her fingers. The diamonds, which had rested against my skin for 20 years, now threw frantic little sparks of light across her face. "Mom says it's from the flea market," Lily announced to the table, her voice loud with the unearned confidence of a child who has never been told no. "But it looks kind of fake, right?" My brother, Mark, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My mother's smile tightened at the edges. But it was Julia, my sister-in-law, who spoke. She gave a little laugh, a perfectly polished sound designed to smooth over any social awkwardness. "But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from." "Oh, honey, give it back," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You know how sentimental Aunt Mia is about her trinkets." Trinkets. The word hung in the air, cheap and dismissive. A few people at the table chuckled, relieved that the tension was broken. They followed Julia's lead as they always did. "It was easier." Mark chuckled. My uncle chuckled. They all saw a little girl's harmless curiosity and a woman's silly attachment to an old piece of jewelry. Everyone chuckled. Except me. I looked at Julia's perfect suburban smile, a smile that had dismissed me for 15 years. I looked at my niece, who was already learning that same smile. I felt the bare skin on my neck, cold where the necklace had been. In that cold, empty space, a decision formed. It was not loud or angry. It was as quiet and as hard as a diamond. That was the moment I decided this dinner would be the last time anyone in the Caldwell family laughed at my expense. From the outside, you would want to be a Caldwell. You would see the big house with its white columns and sprawling green lawn in the suburbs of Seattle. You would see the photos Julia posted online, Christmas cards with everyone in matching cashmere, summer brunches on the flagstone patio, candid shots of the children that were anything but. We looked immaculate, a portrait of American success. But if you scratched the surface of that glossy photograph, you'd find rot underneath. Inside our family, love was not a comfort. It was a contest. And I was always losing. The contest began with my father. He was a man of immense charm, the kind of person who could sell you anything and make you thank him for it. He built a successful real estate business on handshakes and charisma. My brother, Mark, inherited that charm like a family heirloom. He has Dad's easy smile and his ability to make everyone feel like the most important person in the room. But he also inherited Dad's blindness to the things that mattered, the quiet currents of unhappiness that ran beneath the surface. Dad never saw how Mom shrunk herself to make him seem bigger. And Mark never saw how his wife, Julia, did the same thing. Only her version was sharper, colder, and aimed at me. Julia was the architect of our family's modern image. She married Mark and immediately began renovating his life, starting with his family. She was obsessed with appearance, with the unspoken language of brands, private schools, and the right kind of friends. Her own family was from old money that had mostly run out. So she clung to the performance of wealth with a desperate, ferocious grip. Her children, Lily and young Tom, learned early that their worth was measured by the logo on their shirt and the volume of their accomplishments. Lily's ballet, Tom's spot on the travel soccer team, these weren't hobbies. They were entries on a resume Julia was building for them, and by extension for herself. And then there was me. I was the quiet one, the single one, the accountant. In a family that valued flash and noise, I was a muted gray. I didn't look successful. I drove a sensible sedan, not a German SUV. I lived in a tastefully minimalist apartment in the city, not a sprawling house in the suburbs. I wore clothes that were well-made but not branded. I found beauty in the clean, absolute truth of a balanced ledger. To my family, especially to Julia, My life was a quiet reproach to their loud extravagance. My stability seemed like a judgment on their constant striving. They mistook my calm for weakness. They saw my introversion as a lack of ambition. They believed that because I did not fight for the spotlight, I did not deserve to stand in the light at all. For years, I let them believe it. It was easier than fighting. I'd attend the family dinners, the birthday parties, the holidays. I would bring thoughtful, modest gifts that were quickly overshadowed by the expensive, flashy presents Julia would give. I would listen to her talk for hours about Lily's competitions or the 5-star resort they'd booked for spring break. I would nod and smile, and a little piece of me would die each time. I remember one Christmas years ago. I had spent weeks knitting a beautiful, intricate blanket for my mother. It was made from soft, expensive merino wool in her favorite shade of blue. She opened it, and her face lit up with genuine love. "Oh, Mia, it's beautiful," she whispered, running her hands over it. She wrapped it around her shoulders. Then Julia bustled over. "Time for our gift," she announced loudly. Mark carried in a giant flat-screen box. It was a smart mirror, a piece of technology Mom didn't need and would never use. It cost thousands of dollars. "Now you can watch the news while you do your makeup," Julia said, beaming. The blanket was forgotten. It was put aside on a chair to make room for the giant box. My mother, a woman who hated conflict, gushed over the mirror. "Oh, Julia, Mark, you shouldn't have," she said, her eyes flicking over to me with a silent apology. But an apology without action is just another form of silence. My handmade gift, full of warmth and time and love, was reduced to a footnote. Julia's expensive, impersonal gadget became the star of the show. She looked at me over the top of the box with a small, triumphant smile. She had won. I hadn't even realized we were competing. That was the pattern. My achievements were minimized. My feelings were dismissed. My presence was tolerated. I was the reliable, boring anchor that made them feel more exciting, more vibrant. I was the plain wall they hung their beautiful pictures on. They were wrong about me. My calm was not weakness. It was control. I controlled my finances. I controlled my emotions. I controlled my life. I had built a world for myself that was stable and peaceful. But the poison from my family kept seeping in, drop by toxic drop. The incident with the necklace wasn't the first cut, but it was the one that went too deep, the one that finally made me realize that to save myself, I had to cut them off. The rot had spread too far, and I was done letting it consume me. The dinner was for my mother's 65th birthday. The table was set for 12, gleaming with the good silver and crystal that only came out for special occasions. Julia, of course, had organized everything. She had ordered a ridiculously complicated cake from a boutique bakery and hired a caterer so she wouldn't have to cook. The entire evening was a performance, a stage play titled, "The Perfect Family Celebrates Its Beloved Matriarch." I sat across from Julia, watching her hold court. She was in her element, her voice rising above the polite chatter as she detailed her latest triumph. Lily's acceptance into the Weston Ballet Conservatory's prestigious summer program. "It's simply the best on the West Coast," she said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "The training is unparalleled." "Of course," she sighed, a carefully crafted sound of maternal sacrifice. "It's $50,000 a year for the full-time program. But for Lily? We'll find a way. We have to. It's her dream." Mark beamed beside her, his face glowing with pride. "My daughter, the ballerina," he said to our uncle, who nodded approvingly. My mother watched Lily, her eyes shining. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Just wonderful." No one asked me about my life, about the promotion I'd just gotten at my accounting firm, or the volunteer work I was doing for a local animal shelter. I didn't expect them to. I just sat there, sipping my water, an audience member at my own family dinner. I was happy for Lily. She was a genuinely talented dancer. I had watched her recitals, seen the focus in her eyes, the joy in her movements. The talent was real. The package it came in, however, the arrogance, the entitlement, the casual cruelty she was learning at her mother's knee, was becoming unbearable. Then came the moment with the necklace. After Lily's pronouncement that it was a fake from a flea market, after Julia's condescending remark about my trinkets, the flow of the evening was expertly redirected. Julia announced it was time for cake. The lights were dimmed. Mark carried in the cake, ablaze with candles, and everyone launched into a loud, slightly off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. I didn't sing. I couldn't. The broken necklace was in my hand, the 2 pieces of the chain lying in my palm like a dead snake. The 3 small diamonds felt impossibly heavy. This necklace was the last thing my grandmother gave me before she died. She put it around my neck in the hospital, her hands frail and trembling. "For my Mia," she had whispered, her voice thin as paper, "because you have a heart of gold. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." It wasn't a trinket. It was a promise. It was the armor I wore against the world, against my own family, and now it was broken. While everyone else was focused on the cake, I slipped away from the table and stood by the large bay window overlooking the dark garden. The reflection in the glass showed a woman standing alone, separate from the laughing family gathered around the glowing cake. I held the pieces of the chain up to the faint light, my thumb tracing the sharp, broken edge. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Julia. She was holding a small plate with a slice of cake. "Not having any cake, Mia?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm not hungry," I said, not turning around. She came to stand beside me, looking at the necklace in my hand. She gave a little sigh, the kind one gives to a child who is being overly dramatic. "Don't worry so much about that, Mia," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "It's just jewelry. Things break. Memories are what matter more." I finally turned to look at her. I gave her a small, tight smile. The kind of smile that doesn't show any teeth. The kind of smile that is a warning. "You're right, Julia," I said, my voice perfectly even. "Memories do matter." I let the silence hang between us for a beat. I watched her self-satisfied expression, the look of a person who believes they have handled a difficult situation with grace. She had no idea. She saw a broken piece of cheap jewelry. She saw her spinster sister-in-law being sentimental. She saw nothing of value. I looked back at the happy family scene, at my mother laughing, at my brother putting his arm around his daughter. And I thought, "You're absolutely right, Julia. Memories matter." By the next morning, she would have a brand new one, a memory she would never, ever forget. To understand what I did next, you have to understand the secret I had been keeping for 3 years. It was a secret I never intended to reveal. It was mine, a quiet act of goodness in a world that felt increasingly loud and transactional. It started at a charity gala my firm sponsored. I usually hated these events, the forced small talk, the uncomfortable dresses, the feeling of being judged on your job title. I was standing near the silent auction table, trying to look like I belonged, when a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile struck up a conversation with me. Her name was Dr. Emily Vargas. She was the director of the Weston Ballet Conservatory. She wasn't trying to solicit a donation. We just talked. She spoke about dance not as a hobby for rich kids, but as a discipline, an art form that saved lives. She told me about the students who came from nothing, who scrubbed floors and worked night shifts to pay for their pointe shoes. She told me about the raw, breathtaking talent she saw every day, and the heartbreak of watching that talent wither because a family couldn't afford the tuition. She told me one story in particular, about a young girl from a small town whose family had lost everything in a flood. She was the most gifted dancer Dr. Vargas had seen in a decade, but she had to drop out. The story stuck with me. The injustice of it felt like a stone in my gut. A dream so pure and powerful, broken by something as mundane as money. I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that girl. I opened my laptop and looked at my investment portfolio. I am an accountant. I am good with money. I live modestly, well below my means. I don't have children or a husband to spend money on. I had been saving and investing carefully for years, and the numbers on the screen surprised even me. There was more than enough, far more than I would ever need. The next day, I called Dr. Vargas. I proposed an idea. I wanted to create a private anonymous scholarship, a full ride, $50,000 a year, for one student chosen by her and her staff, based on a combination of extraordinary talent and financial need. I had only one condition. My name could never be revealed to anyone. Not the school, not the student, not their family. I wanted it to be a pure gift. No thank you notes, no plaques on a wall, no galas in my honor. I wanted the student to feel they had earned it on merit alone. I would be the evergreen grant. Dr. Vargas was stunned, then overjoyed. We worked with my lawyer to set it up. It was clean, legal, and completely confidential. For the first 2 years, I received a simple letter from her office informing me of the student who had been selected, along with a link to a private video of their audition. I would watch these young dancers, their faces alight with passion, and feel a quiet, profound sense of rightness. This was the best thing I had ever done with my money. Then, a year ago, the annual letter arrived. I opened it, expecting to read about another gifted stranger. But the name on the paper made my breath catch in my throat. The recipient of the Evergreen Grant was Lily Caldwell, my niece. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at her name. The irony was staggering. Of all the dancers in all the world, it was her. Dr. Vargas had no idea of our connection. To her, Lily was just another applicant with a powerful audition tape and a financial aid form that showed her parents' income was not enough to cover the exorbitant tuition. Mark and Julia made a good living, but $50,000 a year in cash, on top of their mortgage and lifestyle, was beyond them. A part of me was furious. My money, my quiet, heartfelt gift, was going to fund the dream of Julia's child. It felt like a cosmic joke. But then I thought of Lily, the actual girl, not the product of her mother's ambition. I thought of the genuine talent I had seen in her. Did she deserve to be punished for her mother's awfulness? I decided she didn't, so I let it be. I kept the secret. I paid the tuition. I listened with a hidden, bitter smile as Julia bragged for months about how Lily had won a prestigious merit scholarship from the conservatory. She had no idea that the prestigious committee was me, signing a check in my quiet apartment. I let her believe that Lily's brilliance alone had earned her this prize. I liked it that way. My quiet generosity continued, hidden in plain sight without need for applause, until generosity was met with arrogance. Until the family that I was secretly supporting laughed in my face as they broke the one thing I held precious. The dinner wasn't just an insult. It was a desecration. They were mocking the very source of their good fortune. They had taken my kindness and trampled on it. And in that moment, I knew the gift had to end. It was no longer a gift. It had become an enablement. The drive home from my mother's house was a blur of streetlights and silence. The broken necklace was nestled in a cocktail napkin inside my purse, its cold, sharp edges a constant reminder. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. There was no rage boiling inside me, no tears stinging my eyes. The years of swallowing small hurts and biting back sharp words had left me with something else entirely. A cold, clear certainty. An emotional storm had been brewing for 15 years, and it had finally passed. Now, all that was left was the calm, quiet work of cleaning up the damage. When I got back to my apartment, the silence was a comfort. My space is a reflection of my mind, neat, organized, everything in its place. It's a stark contrast to the cluttered opulence of my brother's home, where every surface shouts for attention. I walked into my kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove to boil. I opened a canister and measured out a spoonful of chamomile tea, the scent of dried flowers filling the air. This was not the act of a woman on the verge of a breakdown. This was a ritual. This was business. With a warm mug of tea cooling beside me, I sat down at the small desk in my living room and opened my laptop. The screen cast a blue glow on my face. My fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. I didn't have to think about what to write. The words were already there, fully formed. First, I opened a new message to Dr. Emily Vargas. I found her private email address from our initial correspondence. I kept the message professional, impersonal, and absolute. There would be no room for negotiation. Subject: Termination of Evergreen Grant Funding. Student number 4276, Dear Dr. Vargas, I hope this email finds you well. I am writing to inform you of my decision to terminate the funding for the Evergreen Grant, specifically for student number 4276, Lily Caldwell. This termination is to be effective immediately for all future tuition payments. This was not a simple decision, and it is with regret that I take this action. The circumstances that led to the creation of the grant have fundamentally changed. Thank you for your professionalism and your dedication to your students. I wish you and the Weston Conservatory all the best. Sincerely, the donor. My finger hovered over the send button. A flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was it fair to punish Lily for her mother's sins? A child's dream was hanging in the balance. But this was no longer about a dream. It was about a lesson. A lesson in respect, in gratitude, in the simple human decency of not mocking the person who is quietly paving your way. Julia would never learn. Mark would never stand up for me. But Lily Lily was still young. Perhaps this lesson would be the most valuable one she ever received. I clicked the button. The email was gone. Next, I composed a message to Mark and Julia. This one required a different kind of precision. It had to be informative but distant, a perfectly crafted little bomb of information wrapped in a tissue of feigned sympathy. Subject: regarding Lily's scholarship. Mark and Julia. I was just made aware of some terrible news regarding Lily's scholarship at the Weston Conservatory. It seems the private donor who was funding her place has unexpectedly withdrawn their support. Effective immediately. I believe the conservatory's policy states that, in such a case, the student's full tuition for the upcoming term will be due in 30 days. If it isn't paid, her enrollment will be terminated. I am so sorry to hear this. I can only imagine how upsetting it must be. Maya, the last line was a work of art. It was true in its own way. I was sorry they had forced my hand. I was sorry they were about to face the consequences of their own arrogance. And I could, in fact, imagine exactly how upsetting it would be. I read the email twice, then hit send. Click. I closed the laptop and took a sip of my now lukewarm tea. The silence of my apartment pressed in around me, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of a ledger that has just been balanced. For years, the accounts of my family had been a mess of emotional debt and unearned credit. I had just corrected the entry. There was no joy in it. No triumphant feeling of revenge. There was only the clean, quiet satisfaction of a problem being solved. Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive with a thunderclap. Sometimes it starts with a quiet keystroke in a darkened room. 20 minutes. That's how long it took for the world I had reset to start spinning again. I had just finished my tea and was rinsing the mug in the sink when my phone, lying on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with a picture of Mark and Julia, smiling on a ski lift, their faces pink with cold and privilege. Underneath, the name read simply, Mark. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs, but my hand was steady as I dried it on a towel and picked up the phone. I let it ring twice more before answering, a small, deliberate act of control. Hello, Mark, I said, my voice as calm as the still water in the sink. Mia? Hey, a really weird thing just happened, he started. His voice was tight, trying to sound casual and failing completely. He was always the family's designated buffer, the one sent in to smooth things over when Julia's sharp edges had drawn blood. We just got an email from you. About Lily's scholarship? Yes, I said. Just the one word. I offered nothing else. I made him do the work. It says her donor pulled out. Is that real? Do you know what happened? He was speaking quickly, the words tumbling over each other. He sounded genuinely confused, as if this were a natural disaster that had struck without warning. In a way, it was. I only know what I wrote in the email, Mark, I said, keeping my tone level, almost bored. Apparently, the donor changed their mind. I could hear muffled sounds in the background, a door closing, footsteps on a hardwood floor. Then, Julia's voice, sharp and frantic, cut through the line. Give me the phone, Mark. You're doing it wrong. There was a rustle, and suddenly the voice in my ear was completely different. It was high-pitched, laced with a panic she couldn't conceal. Mia, what is this? What's this email you sent? What do you mean, terrible news? You knew about this before we did? Hello, Julia, I said coolly. Don't hello, Julia me, she shrieked. The academy just called. They confirmed it. Lily's scholarship is gone. Her dream is gone. Who would do this? Why? I let her questions hang in the air, a long, stretching silence that I knew would unravel her. On the other end of the line, I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. The panic was building. I don't know, Julia, I said softly. Maybe the donor felt unappreciated. Maybe they were tired of being taken for granted. Another pause. She was processing my words, trying to fit them into her worldview where everything revolved around her. Unappreciated? What does that even mean? It was an anonymous donor. We never even met them. How could we appreciate them? I walked over to my living room window and looked out at the city lights twinkling below. They were distant and beautiful, a world away from the ugly conversation I was having. Sometimes appreciation isn't about grand gestures, I said, my voice thoughtful. Sometimes it's about the small things. It's about being kind. It's about teaching your children to be respectful of other people's property, of other people's feelings. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with dawning comprehension. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, connecting my words to the scene at the dinner table. The necklace. My sentimental trinkets. The laughter, respectful. She whispered, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. What does the necklace have to do with this? Maybe more than you think, I replied. I pictured her standing in her massive, perfect kitchen, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Mark would be hovering nearby, his face a mask of useless concern. It's Lily's dream, Mia, she said, her voice rising again, this time with a note of pleading. This has nothing to do with some silly little family argument. You can't let them do this to her. And there it was, the final piece she needed to solve the puzzle. I had given her the clue, and she had walked right into it. Then maybe you should have thought of that, I said, my voice dropping, losing all its warmth. Maybe you should treat the people who are funding that dream with a little more respect. The gasp on the other end was sharp, a sudden intake of breath that was pure shock. It was the sound of a person staring at a ghost. The people funding it? She stammered. Her voice was barely a whisper now, all the fight gone out of it, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. You mean you were the donor? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I just stood by the window, listening to the sound of her world collapsing through the phone. I heard a choked sob. I heard Mark's voice in the background, a low murmur asking, What? What is it? I let my silence be the answer. I let it stretch and fill every crack in their perfect, curated life. My silence was the truth. It was the receipt for 15 years of disrespect. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was the loudest sound they had ever heard. They must have hung up, or maybe they just dropped the phone. Either way, the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. A wave of something, not triumph, but a profound, weary finality, washed over me. I had done it. The secret was out. The invisible strings I had been using to hold up my niece's dream were now cut, and the full weight of it was about to come crashing down on them. I slept better that night than I had in years. The next call came at 9 o'clock the following morning. It was Mark again. This time, I could hear the echo on the line that told me I was on speakerphone. They were presenting a united front. Mia, Mark began, his voice strained. We need to talk about this. We are talking, I said. Julia's voice cut in, thick with unshed tears. It was her actress voice, the one she used when she wanted sympathy. Mia, please. What Lily did. It was an accident. The clasp was probably old. She didn't mean for it to break. I sat down at my kitchen table, cradling a fresh cup of coffee. The morning sun was streaming through the window, and I felt strangely calm, like a doctor about to deliver a difficult but necessary diagnosis. Accidents don't come with laughter, Julia, I said simply. An accident is when you trip and fall. When you announce to a table full of people that something is fake, and from a flea market while you're breaking it, that's not an accident. That's a performance. She's a child, Julia cried, her voice cracking. She's 12 years old. She just repeats things she hears. She didn't understand what she was saying. Then you should have taught her better, I replied, my voice unwavering. You're her mother. You taught her that my things are trinkets. You taught her that I am someone to be dismissed. She was just repeating the lesson you've been teaching her for her entire life. This isn't on her, Julia. This is on you. There was a sharp intake of breath. The truth, spoken so plainly, had clearly hit its mark. Mark cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Mia, this is an overreaction. It was a necklace, a piece of jewelry. You're talking about ruining Lily's future over a necklace. That was the line, the one I had been waiting for, the one that showed they still didn't get it. They never would. First of all, Mark, it wasn't a necklace. It was my grandmother's necklace. It was the last thing she ever gave me. But you're right, it is just an object. This was never about the necklace. I took a slow sip of my coffee. This is about the look on your wife's face when it happened. It's about the 15 years of little comments, condescending smiles, and casual dismissals. It's about sitting at my own mother's birthday dinner and being treated like a ghost at the table until my property was broken for sport. The necklace wasn't the wound, Mark. It was just the salt you finally poured into it. I continued, my voice low and steady. And I'm not ruining anything. I'm simply choosing to stop paying for people who mock me while I am feeding their dreams. I am reallocating my resources. The scholarship was a gift. A gift can be taken back when the recipient proves unworthy of it. That's not ruin. That's a consequence. The silence on the other end was a testament to their shock. They had clearly expected me to fold. They thought I'd make my point, and then when faced with the enormity of the consequences, I would relent. They always thought I would relent. I was Mia, the quiet one, the peacemaker. They had forgotten that the quietest people are often the ones with the firmest boundaries. Once those boundaries are finally drawn. Finally, Mark spoke again. His voice was different now. All the bluster was gone. It was hollow, defeated. The voice of a man facing a math problem he cannot solve. The tuition, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The academy called again this morning. They were very clear. The full $50,000 is due by Friday. If we don't pay it, they release her spot on Monday. Mia, we don't have it. We can't afford it. It was a raw admission of failure from a man who had built his entire identity on the appearance of success. It was the sound of the beautiful facade cracking right down the middle. I felt a pang of something, not pity for him, but a sad recognition of our shared history, of the boy he used to be before Julia remade him in her image. But the feeling passed. I remembered Julia's proud declaration at the dinner table just 2 nights before. The words had been echoing in my mind ever since. I picked them up and handed them back to him. You said you'd find a way, I replied, my voice soft but unyielding. You said you'd do anything for your child's dream. I paused, letting the weight of his own words settle on him. Now's your chance. I hung up the phone. There was nothing more to say. The reckoning was over. Now, all that was left was to watch the fallout. The days that followed were the quietest I had ever known. Wednesday passed in a shroud of silence. Then Thursday. My phone, usually buzzing with texts from the family group chat about logistics for some upcoming event, remained dark. It was a strange, unnerving piece. I found myself checking it constantly, not out of hope, but out of a morbid curiosity. I imagined the frantic energy inside their house, the hushed, angry conversations, the desperate calls to the bank, the dawning, terrifying realization that there was no magic solution. They were trapped by the consequences of their own making. I knew their finances almost as well as I knew my own. Mark made good money, but Julia spent it faster. The mortgage on their oversized house, the leases on their 2 luxury cars, the country club membership, the designer clothes for the children. It was a house of cards built on debt and monthly payments. Coming up with $50,000 in cash in less than a week was an impossibility for them. Their wealth was an illusion, just like their perfect family. Friday came and went. I worked from home, my laptop open, my mind a million miles away. At 5:01 p.m., I knew the bursar's office at the Weston Conservatory was closed. No payment had been made. I didn't need anyone to tell me. If they had somehow pulled it off, my phone would have blown up with triumphant, resentful messages. Their silence was my confirmation. On Monday morning, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from Dr. Vargas. It was short, professional, and tinged with a sadness I could read between the lines. Dear donor, as per your instructions, I am writing to confirm that the deadline for tuition payment for student number 4276, Lily Caldwell, passed on Friday without receipt of funds. As is our policy, her spot in the full-time conservatory program has been officially released. We have already offered it to the first student on our waiting list, a very gifted young dancer from Portland whose family will be overjoyed. Again, I am sorry things ended this way. Your grant has done and will continue to do so much good. Sincerely, Dr. Emily Vargas. I closed my laptop, a deep, shuddering breath escaping my lips. It was done. The finality of it was like a stone dropping into a deep well. That evening, the inevitable call came. This time, it was Julia alone. The caller ID showed her cell phone number. The anger and panic from the previous calls were gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out sound of defeat. She was sobbing, but not in the performative way she had before. These were the gut-wrenching, hiccuping sobs of genuine grief. They called her, she whispered, her voice raw. They called Lily this afternoon to tell her the spot was gone. She locked herself in her room. She won't come out. She's devastated, Mia. For the first time, I felt a sharp, painful stab of empathy. Not for Julia, but for Lily. A 12-year-old girl sitting alone in her room, believing her dream had died. I pictured her face, and my resolve wavered for a fraction of a second. But then I remembered why I had done this. This pain was a lesson. A hard one, but a necessary one. I'm sure she is, I said, and my voice was soft, free of any triumph. It's a devastating thing to lose an opportunity like that. I paused. Maybe next time she'll think before she breaks something precious. It wasn't her fault, Julia cried, a last flicker of her old fire returning. No, I agreed calmly. It wasn't. It was yours. I ended the call before she could respond. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were a spy reporting from behind enemy lines. It was her signature move, acknowledging a problem without ever taking a side, a lifetime of trying to keep a peace that had never really existed. Mia, honey, she began. I spoke with Mark. He and Julia are, well, they're very upset. I know, Mom, I said. They told me the most incredible story, she continued, her voice hushed. They said that you were the donor for Lily's scholarship. Is that true? It was, I said. There was no point in hiding it anymore. There was a long pause on her end. I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting in her pristine living room, twisting a ring on her finger. And you canceled it? Because of that little incident with the necklace? I canceled it because the necklace was the final bill for a debt of disrespect that has been accumulating for 15 years, I said, speaking a truth to my mother I had never dared to before. I canceled it because I was tired of being their safety net and their punchline at the same time. But Mia, they're family, she said, her voice full of a gentle, pained confusion. It was the sentence that had been used to paper over every crack in our family's foundation for as long as I could remember. It was the justification for every hurt, the excuse for every cruelty. I know, I said, and a sad, quiet understanding settled over me. My own mother would never truly get it. She was too enmeshed in the system, too invested in the facade. But family shouldn't get a free pass to treat you poorly. I paid for Lily's dream for a full year, Mom. I never asked for a thing in return. My voice was clear and steady. Respect was the only payment I ever wanted, and when they couldn't even give me that, I closed the account. A week passed. The silence from my brother's house became a permanent fixture, a new cold wall between us. My mother called a few more times, making vague, unhappy noises about forgiveness and letting things blow over, but she didn't push. I think on some level she knew I had changed. The old Mia, the one who would absorb any slight for the sake of family harmony, was gone. This new Mia had boundaries made of steel. The quiet had started to feel less like a void and more like peace. I was finding a new rhythm to my life, one that didn't involve bracing for the next family gathering. Then, one afternoon, an envelope appeared in my mailbox that was different from the usual bills and junk mail. It was a simple, plain white envelope. There was no return address. My name and address were written on the front in a careful, looping script that was still working out the finer points of cursive. It was a child's handwriting. My breath caught. I took it upstairs to my apartment and set it on the kitchen counter, staring at it as if it might explode. I was afraid to open it. I imagined it was a letter from Lily, dictated by Julia, full of accusations and melodrama. I imagined it was a desperate last-ditch plea for me to change my mind. I almost threw it away, but my curiosity won. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind with the pale blue lines and the pink margin on the left. It was folded neatly in 3. I unfolded it. The letter was short. Every word felt chosen and achingly real. Dear Aunt Mia, I am so sorry. I'm sorry I broke your necklace. I didn't know it was real or that it was important to you. I shouldn't have touched it. It was wrong. Mom said things about you and your stuff that weren't true. I used to think she was right, but I don't think so anymore. She is really mad, and so is Dad. But I think they are mad because they got caught. You helped me more than anyone ever has. You paid for my dream, and I didn't even know it was you. I never got to say thank you. I feel awful that I was mean to you when you were being so kind to me. Thank you for helping me, even if it's over now. I will never forget it. I am sorry. Lily, I read the letter 3 times. With each reading, the tight protective knot in my chest loosened. By the end of the 3rd reading, tears were streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of relief, tears of profound, heart-aching validation. There were no excuses. There was no blame shifting. There was just the clean, simple, devastating honesty of a child who had finally seen the truth. The line, Mom said things that weren't true, was everything. It was Lily separating herself from her mother's narrative. It was the sound of a conscience being born. In that moment, I knew I had not ruined a little girl's future. I had given her a chance at a real one built on character instead of privilege. My quiet, painful action had not been an act of destruction. It had been an act of clarification. It had cleared away the smoke and smashed the mirrors. And in the wreckage, Lily had found a piece of herself. I went to my desk and pulled out a piece of my own stationery, thick and cream-colored, and a good fountain pen. An email felt too impersonal for this. A text felt cheap. This conversation deserved care. I wrote back to her, my own handwriting clear and steady. Dear Lily, thank you for your letter. It means more to me than you know. I forgive you completely. The necklace can be fixed. Things that are broken can often be made whole again, sometimes even stronger than before. What matters is that you understood. You are an incredibly talented dancer. I saw it from the first moment I watched you on stage. That talent belongs to you, not to a school, not to your parents, and not to me. Don't ever let anyone, including yourself, convince you that your dream can only happen in one expensive building. Keep dancing. Dance in your room, in a local studio, in the park. Dance because you love it. Real talent doesn't need a $50,000 scholarship to survive. It just needs heart. I am very proud of the person you are becoming. With love, Aunt Mia. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it to her at my brother's house. Walking to the mailbox felt different this time. It wasn't an act of war. It was a peace treaty. Not with my brother or his wife, but with the future. I had closed a door on a toxic past, and in doing so, I had opened a small window for the next generation. It was more than I had ever hoped for. The necklace sits around my neck now, resting in its familiar place against my skin. I took it to a jeweler downtown, a quiet old man with gentle hands and a magnifying glass permanently attached to his eye. He fixed the chain and replaced the clasp with one that is a little thicker, a little stronger than the original. He said it would be more secure this way. I thought that was fitting. Sometimes things have to break to reveal what they're truly made of. And sometimes you have to break with the people you love in order to save yourself. The fallout settled into a new, strange reality. Julia lost her power over me, and with it, the shiny pretense she had wrapped her life in. Mark lost his comfortable silence and was forced to face the real-world consequences of his passivity. I hear they had to sell one of their cars and cancel their country club membership. But Lily, she gained something. Through the loss of a scholarship, she gained a conscience. And I, in losing the family I thought I was supposed to have, finally gained peace. They will probably always say I did it for revenge. They'll tell the story at dinner parties, the ones I'm no longer invited to, about their bitter, childless sister who couldn't stand to see them happy. But I know the truth. Revenge is about causing pain. What I did was about restoring balance. I simply handed them the bill for services they had long taken for granted. My life is quieter now, but it is also fuller. It is filled with my own choices, my own values, my own unshakable sense of worth. The silence isn't empty. It's clean. It's the sound of self-respect. If you've ever had someone laugh while they were breaking something you loved, if you've ever been made to feel small so that someone else could feel big, hit subscribe. And remember this: kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's permission for them to keep taking from you until there's nothing left. And you are worth far too much to let that happen.